They said the sword was sharp enough to steal the soul before the body noticed. But steel does not sever thought, nor memory, nor the smell of lilies wilting in spring. Before the blade sang, she waited in white, not the white of innocence, the white of surrender, of bone, of the final petal before rot sets in. There is a silence that comes only when kings murder their love. It is not peace. It is not stillness. It is a breath held too long by the throat of history, waiting to scream, but knowing no one would listen. Anne Boleyn stood in that silence. She did not tremble. She was born, not from womb, but from ambition stitched in velvet, crowned not by fate, but by whispers sewn into her skin. The court once chanted her name as if it were scripture. Then they unspoke it. They erased her with the same mouths that once kissed her hand. She was the queen of hollow triumphs, the bride of thunder, and Henry the lion who devoured his own young. The god who built a new church just to name her holy, now stood behind glassy eyes and watched his creation die. They do not tell you how cold the tower becomes when a crown begins to rust. They do not tell you what she saw when the priest turned away, or how her ladies wept not like women, but like graves opening before their time. Anne Boleyn defied a king, and so the sword was summoned. But the blade did not fall on a traitor. It fell on a mirror, a reflection too sharp to bear, a woman too vivid to survive. Her breath was the last rebellion, her silence, the final hymn. She was not born a queen, nor molded in the quiet fires of nobility's tradition. Anne Boleyn was forged in flickering shadows, a daughter of calculation and foreign wind, raised not with lullabies, but with the distant clang of courtly ambition and veiled schemes. Her skin did not glow with the pale softness of meek obedience, but shimmered with the hard polish of something observed too closely, judged too cruelly, and yet never touched. From the moment she arrived in England, her presence was not gentle. It bruised the eye. Her voice, too sharp for flattery, sliced through the velveted corridors of power, and the courtiers whispered of her, not as if she were a woman, but a danger. Her dark eyes held a glint not of seduction, but of memory, as if she had seen the end already and smiled at its inevitability. She danced like she did not belong to the earth. When she tilted her head, it was not coyness, it was strategy. She was no man's comfort. She was prophecy dressed in pearls. The court of Henry VIII was a golden net strung with thorns. Its chandeliers bled light, and its laughter carried the echo of execution. At its heart stood a man bloated by power and paranoia. A king crowned twice, once by blood, once by his own desperate will. Henry was not a monarch at rest. He hunted God in mirrors and bred heirs like crops, weeding out women who failed to bloom. When Anne arrived, he saw not a mistress, but a revolt. She was not kind like Catherine, nor mute like the courtiers trained to say yes with their eyes. Anne said no, and she said it sweetly, as if denial were a gift. She withheld not just her body, but her worship. That was her heresy. To refuse a king and survive was witchcraft. To make him wait was treason wrapped in satin. So he waited, and the kingdom waited. As the years unraveled, the air around her began to shimmer, not with grace, but with expectation. Her rise was not a climb. It was an eruption. Henry tore his crown from Rome to lay it at her feet. He shattered centuries of doctrine with a single hunger. And Anne, not yet queen, not yet fallen, watched as the walls bent around her. In her chambers, scripture and seduction were penned in the same hand. She played the lute and read forbidden books. She laughed in the presence of bishops. She made faith out of herself. To some, she was divine interruption. To others, she was Eve revisited. But Anne, alone, knew the truth of her reflection, she was a storm wrapped in skin, waiting to be unleashed. The court did not forgive what it could not control. Anne's every breath became a scandal. Her manner, too direct, her words, too clever, her eyes, always watching. The queen who had not yet sat on the throne was already drowning in suspicion, and yet she smiled. She leaned into danger as if it were a lover. Her power was not loud. It was silent and suffocating. Women curtsied with fear disguised as grace. Men admired her as one might admire a flame beautiful. Yes, but never to be held. She gave Henry a daughter, and they named her Elizabeth, a name now soaked in legacy. But then a disappointment swaddled in silk. He wanted a son, a symbol, a sword to replace his aging frame, and Anne, for all her fires, gave him not a weapon but a mirror. It cracked him, but still, for a while, the mask held. She wore her crown like a blade. Her coronation was a parade of ghosts, priests who cursed her in Latin, nobles who drank to her downfall in private. She walked through it all as if every stone had been laid for her feet alone. In the banquet halls, she wore red not for beauty, but for blood. The tapestries whispered behind her, and the walls took notes. She did not bow to tradition. She rewrote it in the shape of her smile. And yet, behind every triumph, the wolves gathered, her ladies, her enemies, her allies, all the same. The tower loomed in the distance not as a fortress, but a promise. For queens do not age in England. They vanish. They are swallowed whole. Inside Anne's eyes lived a secret England one built not by kings, but by women who bled quietly and endured loudly. Her reign was not long, but it was sharp. She passed through the court like a needle, threading new loyalties, stitching new fears. When she spoke, men listened not because they believed her, but because they feared who else might. Her words became prophecy, and prophecy is a dangerous thing in the presence of a fragile god. Henry, once bewitched, grew weary. Love in a crown is a serpent coiled around the throat. His glances turned from her. His counsel grew colder. The silence between them fattened into suspicion. Anne was no longer novelty. She was memory. And kings kill memory faster than enemies. The palace corridors grew darker. Candles burned lower. Servants moved like ghosts. Eyes lowered. Ears sharpened. Rumors became currency. Her brother lingered too long in her rooms. A court musician, once favored, disappeared behind locked doors. Her enemies did not confront her. They watched. They waited. They documented every smile as treason, every sigh as seduction. And Anne, either unaware or uncaring, kept walking into the center of their gaze. She did not dim herself. She did not plead. She wore her danger like perfume. Every step she took was an invitation to the abyss. The queen was now surrounded by 1,000 cuts, too small to bleed until one day. They bled all at once. Her child miscarried. The son she promised the king never breathed. And in that breathless room, something broke that would never be mended. Henry's grief curdled into fury. Her body, once sacred, became suspect. Her voice, once gospel, became poison. A king in mourning is the most dangerous thing of all. He searched her gaze for answers and found only defiance. She had not learned fear, and that, he decided, was the greatest betrayal. So the ground beneath her shifted. Titles were revoked. Smiles turned to sneers. The music stopped. Where once she stood at the center of courtly flame, she now wandered through its ashes. Even her ladies turned strange, softer, too kind, like mourners rehearsing their grief before the body was cold. She watched it all without flinching. Perhaps she knew this was her design all along, not to rule, but to be destroyed, not to be loved, but to be remembered. Anne Boleyn, the queen without a prayer, the mother of a future no one believed in, the woman who taught the king to burn everything he touched, now stood before the mirror of her unmaking. And in that mirror, there were no tears, no apologies, only a crown heavy with silence and the slow breath of a woman who had seen the altar, the bed, and the scaffold, and knew them all to be the same. A queen is never simply born. She is conjured, and Anne was conjured from fire. Fire does not beg to be spared. It only asks to be seen. It began not with a cry, but with a glance held too long across the feast table, where meat bled on silver and wine blurred the mouths of men too clever to speak truth. There are moments in every palace when the light shifts not visibly, but beneath the eyes, and what was once devotion calcifies into calculation. Anne Boleyn, still cloaked in the fragile shadow of her crown, could feel it long before the accusations arrived. They no longer bowed with fear, they bowed with pity, and pity is the prelude to the blade. The court had tired of her music, her clever tongue, once a jewel to be flaunted, now weighed too heavy in the airs of jealous men. She had danced with danger too long, and the music had slowed into silence. Thomas Cromwell, a servant whose smile never reached his eyes, sharpened his ink before he summoned steel. His hands, stained with scripture and blood, began to sew the tapestry of her downfall with thread too thin to touch and knots too tight to unravel. What he needed was not proof-only performance. So he wrote betrayal into the margins of her life and called it justice. They did not drag her to the tower at once. No, they made her walk through her own echo first, on May Day, beneath banners and laughter. Anne sat beside the king while the joust thundered below. Henry wore the face of a man already grieving a death he had not yet ordered. When her champion fell, her brother's friend Norris, whose hand may have brushed hers too long in some corridor where secrets hung in the rafters, the silence afterward roared louder than the horses. The king stood, turned his back, and walked away before the dust even settled. She would never see him again as a husband, only as judge. That night, the palace became a grave dressed in gold. Her bed remained untouched. Her rooms were sealed. And when they came for her, they came without ceremony, but not without witnesses. She was accused of crimes designed not to reveal the truth, but to shatter the possibility of innocence. Adultery, incest, treason, each charge a mirror cracked with purpose. Her brother, George, was bound in the same cords of shame. They said she had kissed the musician, that she had conspired with courtiers in dark corners while the king prayed for heirs, that she had mocked Henry's manhood, that she had cursed the fruit in her womb. Truth was never consulted, only whispers, only the trembling testimonies of those who feared for their own necks. Even her ladies, drawn close under the veil of service, were turned. They had watched her undress. They had heard her murmur in sleep. And so they swore, when summoned, that the queen's virtue had wandered, that her body was not loyal to the crown. The men who condemned her did not seek evidence, only rhythm, the rhythm of a story that would please the king. And they found it. The trial was no trial. It was a ritual, a sacrifice choreographed with robes and parchment. Anne stood in the hall as 1,000 eyes tried to unmake her. She did not tremble. She wore black. Her face, pale but fierce, scanned the nobles seated like gods with dust in their hearts. Her brother, accused of a love unspoken and impossible, faced her with eyes that held no accusation, only disbelief. There were no lovers, only victims. Victims of the story. Victims of a man who could not bear a throne shared with a memory that would not die. In that chamber, Anne was not judged for her sins. She was judged for her presence, for her refusal to vanish, for her refusal to become quiet. Her voice still echoed in Henry's ears, long after he stopped listening. And for that, she was dangerous. The verdict was inevitable. They read it with voices flat and eyes lowered. Guilty. The word did not echo. It simply settled into the floor like rot. Her brother, her supposed lovers, all condemned with her, and Anne, who had once crowned herself with defiance, now felt the iron tighten around her world. The tower was not new to her. She had seen its walls once before, when her star began to rise. Now it received her again, not as guest, but as prisoner. Its stones were colder, its air still and sour with secrets. She did not cry. She did not beg. She spoke softly to her women. She prayed, not to be saved, but to remember how to die with grace. They executed the men first, one by one, brought to the scaffold like sheep painted as wolves. George Boleyn died with poetry on his lips, reciting lines from the Psalms as his blood ran red into the straw. The others followed. Norris, Weston, Brereton, Smeaton, names now lost to history's fog, but each once a heart that beat beside the Queen's chamber, each once a breath that dared to laugh in her presence, each now reduced to a head in a basket, a silence beneath the scaffold. Anne was made to listen, not to their screams, for the axe was swift, but to their absence. The tower grew heavier with each death. Her women grew quieter. The sun no longer entered her window. The world began to shrink into ritual. She dressed. She prayed. She waited. The king, meanwhile, prepared the new queen. Jane Seymour, pale, pliant, unremarkable, waited in the wings, her silence her greatest virtue. Henry, now cleansed of Anne's fire, sought comfort in frost. There was no mourning, only replacement, as if Anne's blood might wash the throne clean for the next wound to be filled. But Anne did not vanish as he had hoped. Even imprisoned, her spirit stained the court. Her name passed between lips like a ghost. Her laughter lingered in corners. Her ambition clung to the curtains. And Henry, though he would never say it, knew she had become something else, something unkillable. But the body must die. That was the rule. The French executioner was summoned, known for his swiftness, no axe or sword. Fitting. Anne was always too elegant for bludgeoning, too sharp for crude tools. They delayed her death for days, whether to torture her or to ensure precision. No one said. But each dawn she rose, believing it might be her last, and each night she slept, not knowing if her dreams would be severed mid-thought. On the final morning, they came with quiet feet. She dressed in gray, not royal, not common, between states, as she always was. She wore a cloak, modest and unadorned, her hair gathered beneath a linen coif. Her face was pale, but calm. She held a prayer book, not for comfort, for posture. They led her through the stone halls. No music, only footsteps, only the creak of wood and the murmur of watchers. The courtyard waited like a mouth, a scaffold of clean boards, draped in black. The crowd was small, but eager. Her ladies followed, trembling. Anne walked without pause. She did not glance back. She did not curse. She did not collapse. At the scaffold, she turned to them, not as queen, but as woman. She spoke clearly, her voice floating above the hush. She was innocent, but she submitted. She praised the king, not with adoration, but with obedience. Her grace in that moment was unbearable, too composed, too knowing. She knelt. The blindfold was offered. She refused it, but then relented. The linen was tied gently. Darkness took her, but not her mind. The sword was hidden from her eyes. That was mercy. The executioner stepped quietly, barefoot across the platform, and lifted his blade into the air. He cried for his assistant to hand him the weapon, a ruse so she would turn her head. And in that turn, in that final gesture of trust, the sword fell. No cry, no struggle, just silence, just the thud of a queen's head landing on straw, just the breath of a people held in suspense. Now released like smoke from a dying candle, Anne Boleyn was dead. But something remained. Something in the air, in the way the light bent across the scaffold, in the way the ravens waited longer than usual before descending. The blade had done its work, but the silence that followed did not end her. It only deepened her. In the stillness after death, Anne Boleyn became something the king could no longer name, nor command, nor bury. Her body was placed in an arrow chest, too small for dignity, and covered in a ragged cloth, as if the violence of her end demanded she be hidden from the world that made her. They laid her in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, the church of the chained, and she sank into the stone like a secret that would never rest. But death did not erase her. It scattered her into whispers, into the marble veins of the court, into the breath of every woman who dared to speak without permission. Anne became a memory sharpened to a blade, not a martyr. Not a saint, but a question that haunted the margins of power. The king remarried, and the bells rang, not in mourning, but in celebration, as if silence could be sweetened by another womb, as if Anne's execution had not stained the crown in a way that no coronation could cleanse. Jane Seymour wore the crown lightly, but even her soft footsteps echoed with Anne's name. The palace was scrubbed clean of her image, her motto, her emblems falcons with broken wings removed from tapestries and replaced with symbols of docile virtue. Yet still, the shadows did not obey. In the halls where Anne once laughed, servants found themselves whispering as if she might return. In the rooms where she read scripture aloud, the air held its breath. The courtiers who once praised her now crossed themselves when they spoke of her, not from reverence, but from unease. For no one could forget that the queen who had changed God's law to wear a crown had left the world with her lips still wet with prayer and her head in a basket. In the months that followed, Henry aged with alarming speed. His eyes darkened. His heart grew slower, colder. The man who had once torn kingdoms apart for the taste of Anne's mouth now avoided her memory as if it were plague. He commissioned no tomb, no statue, no words etched in marble. He did not weep. He married again, and again, and again. Each wife a shadow thinner than the last. Each marriage a ritual, hollow and trembling. Yet Elizabeth, the daughter Anne had given him, the one he had called a mistake, survived. And in her, Anne did not vanish. She unfolded. The child grew under watchful silence, a girl with flame in her hair and steel in her gaze. She was not her mother's echo. She was her revenge, as she learned to read, to command, to rule her voice and her heart with the care of a surgeon sharpening a blade. The ghost of Anne Boleyn stood behind her, not weeping, but watching. Elizabeth would not forget. She carried her mother not in grief, but in gaze. And when the day came that she herself wore the crown, not as wife, not as vessel, but as sovereign, the court did not cheer. It shivered. But Anne's legacy was not written only in the rise of her daughter. It was written in every woman who dared to cross the threshold of silence. It was inked in the hearts of queens who came after her, who knew that to be crowned in England was to be placed not on a throne, but on a knife's edge. Anne's fate was not anomaly. It was blueprint. Her death taught the kingdom that love was a weapon, that truth was irrelevant, and that power in a woman's mouth was treason. Her fall became a lesson whispered to daughters: be beautiful, but not too bright. Be loyal, but never clever. Speak, but only in echoes. And still, they remembered her, not with flowers, but with caution, not with portraits, but with silence. In France, where the sword had been summoned, the tale was told differently, not as justice, but as fear. They whispered of the English king who killed his wives like fruit gone sour. They spoke of the queen who met her death with unblinking eyes. They spoke of her French, her wit, her hands held calmly at her sides as she knelt for the final time. The executioner returned to his homeland, richer but quiet, never forgetting the moment her head fell and the body did not slump, but seemed to resist a final act of defiance. Even in death, some said they saw her lips move after the blade. A whisper, a prayer, a curse. No one could agree. But all who had watched it unfold knew something had gone wrong that morning, not in process, but in soul. As if the wrong queen had died, as if God himself had turned his face away. Within the tower, the stone where she died never quite lost its chill. Later, queens avoided the place. Some said they heard weeping at dawn, though no women were quartered nearby. Others claimed to see her not as ghost, but as glimmer, a figure in gray, walking without feet, head bowed, hands clasped. She did not scream, she did not chase, she only watched, and in her gaze, men found their shame. Centuries passed, and the kingdom changed, but the blood beneath the stones did not dry. Her name remained carved into the history she had never been permitted to shape. She had ruled for 3 short years, yet those years burned brighter than a reign 3 decades long. When the scholars came to write their books, they argued over Anne's heart. Was she guilty? Was she vain? Was she a witch or a woman undone by ambition? None of it mattered. The facts could not speak what the silence already knew. Anne Boleyn was not destroyed because she sinned. She was destroyed because she was seen, fully, too vividly, too defiantly. And men, especially kings, do not tolerate being seen by something they cannot own. She remained unburied in the minds of those who feared the mirror. They renamed her, reimagined her, rewrote her as temptress, victim, heretic, queen. But none of it returned her body to warmth. None of it changed the way she stood in the scaffold's final breath, unflinching. The real Anne, the woman behind the veil of centuries, is not found in books or prayers. She lives in thresholds, in the moment a woman chooses silence or speech, in the tremor before defiance, in the eye that does not look away. Her death was not the end. It was the wound the crown could never cauterize. The daughter she bore, once declared illegitimate, would become a monarch feared by popes and adored by poets. And when Elizabeth reigned, she did not weep for her mother. She ruled for her. She wore her name like armor, her memory like flame. In every courtier's bow, in every ambassador's trembling voice, Anne Boleyn rose again, not as flesh, but as force, as the whisper behind the throne. And so, even as the centuries laid dust on the tower walls, even as the bones of queens and traitors mingled in the same earth, Anne remained, not a ghost, not a memory, but a question carved into the steel of English history. What does it cost to be unforgettable? Not obedience, not loyalty, but everything else. Anne Boleyn gave her head, her name, her body, and in return, she was not erased. She was sharpened. Her death was supposed to be an erasure. Instead, it became a mirror. In the chapel where she lies, there is no grand tomb, no inscription, no effigy, just stone, cold, flat, anonymous. But beneath it, the bones remember. They remember the blade, the silence, the breath that did not return. Anne Boleyn is not mourned by statues, but by air. Her absence curls in the corners of history like smoke from a fire that was never put out. She was not granted mercy, nor myth, only repetition. Each time a crown touches a woman's head in England, the shadow of Anne kneels beside her. Not in warning, not in reverence, in recognition. The sword did not end her, it only named her differently. In dreams, they say she walks without feet, her head cradled gently in her own hands. Not weeping, not angry, watching. The court that once condemned her has crumbled into dust, yet her silence remains heavier than their prayers. She does not haunt with screams. She haunts with memory. She waits at the edge of every betrayal, at the lip of every oath broken in the name of power. She lingers where ambition dares to wear a crown. There are queens who ruled, queens who birthed dynasties, queens who faded. But there is only one queen who was killed for being too alive, too sharp, too unsparing. And so the question remains, echoing softly down the centuries, what do you do with a woman who sees everything, but refuses to look away? You silence her, you smear her, you summon the sword, but still she watches. Still she breathes in the walls. Still she waits, and every time a throne shifts, her name stirs beneath the stone.